In this video, I'm going to show you how to get some controller input using Unity's input system. So right now I have a controller in my hand. Moving the left stick will change the value of this player move input vector. Pressing the right trigger down increases the attack power. So the more I press down, the closer it gets to 1. And when I hold down the X button, is running pressed becomes true, and when I let go, it's false. First, let's install the input system by going to Window, then Package Manager, going to Unity Registry, typing in input and click on the input system and install it. Once it's done, it'll prompt you to restart the editor. Let's do that. Once we're back in Unity, right click in your assets and create a new input actions. And let's call it input actions. How creative. Immediately go to the top right and toggle generate C# class and apply that. That'll immediately auto-generate a new class with the same name as the input action. So just made this input action script. We could ignore that. We're going to let Unity write all that code for us. Now let's modify our input action by double-clicking on it. And we have an action map, which is just a collection of actions. Let's create a new action map by pressing this plus, and let's call it character controls. By default, it'll make this new action for us. We could double-click to rename it, and let's call it move. This will handle the player's movement. And because of that, we're going to change the action type to a value because we want the control type to be a vector too. So we can control both horizontal and vertical movement for the player. Now, based on your preferences, we could add a processor like normalizing the vector, but we're not going to do that for now. Let's add a new action by pressing this plus, and this will be our attack action, and this will be controlled with the right trigger. So we want the action type to be a value, and we want the value to be an axis, and this is just a float between 0 and 1. So when the trigger isn't pressed, that's 0. When the trigger's pressed all the way, it's 1. And this is good for things like driving in video games, so you can control how much gas you're applying to the car. For the move, we're going to add a binding of a gamepad, which will be the left stick, and this should work for most gamepads, your Xbox controllers, your PlayStation controllers, etc. So under attack, we're going to add the binding of a gamepad, but this is going to be the right trigger. So we have one more action to display. This will be run, and this will be a button. For the path, we will make it be the gamepad button south. So that's the X on the PlayStation controller, or whatever the south button is for the Xbox controller. Anyway, once we're done with this, we want to save this asset, and this will auto update the input actions script that is auto generated by Unity, and we can exit out of here. So we have our input actions all set. Now we just need to subscribe to those events, and the way we do that is by instantiating an instance of this input actions class, subscribing to all of those actions, and then enabling the input action. So let's create an empty game object. Let's call it input listener, and let's add a component which will be a new script called input listener. Open up the script in Visual Studio. So let's create a private input actions, and on awake we will just create an instance of that. So input actions is equal to a new input actions, and this input actions class has access to all the actions that we made inside here. And to subscribe to them, we do input actions dot, then the specific control scheme we want, which we created the character controls. Then we want the specific action, so in this case move, and attached to these actions there are different phases. The only three that we care about for this video are the started, performed, and canceled. So let's write dot started, press plus or equal, and then press tab to auto generate some code, and we'll just rename this to on move, and then rename obj to context. So we can copy and paste this twice more. So we have these 3 lines, change started in the second one to performed, and the started in the third one to canceled. As the name suggests, this is run whenever, like, let's say you start pressing the button. Performed is whenever an interaction occurs with this button. So if you move the left stick a little bit, or if you push the trigger a little bit, this will be called. And then canceled is when you stop pressing the button. Now you may be asking, why not just use performed for something like a trigger or a stick, and just ignore these two? I'll answer that at the end of the video. All that's left to do is to enable our input actions by typing input actions.enable. If you don't do this, it won't work. So whenever the move starts, performs, and is canceled, it'll call this method on move. And this context has the data that we need. And we're gonna have to store it somewhere. Let's have it be a serialized field, private vector2 move input. And inside on move, we'll set move input equal to the context dot read value. And it's a generic method, and we could set the type to be vector2. So back in the Unity editor, if I run this and I move the left stick, it works perfectly. And just to show you, if I were to comment out the canceled and the started and reran this, it's running perfectly, but if I let go of the stick, the X and Y don't equal 0. And now we need to subscribe to the other actions we have. So we have input actions dot character controls dot attack. And this is the right trigger, if you remember. So we'll subscribe to dot started, and we'll have this be plus equals on attack. Change this to context. And if you remember, this returns an axis, which is just a float. So let's create a serialized field, call it attack power. And inside on attack, we'll set attack power equal to context dot read value. It's the same exact method we used in the on move method, but in this instance it'll take in a float, and attack power is a float, not a vector. So let's copy this, paste, grab started, grab canceled. We've got all our bases covered, and we have one last action to subscribe to: input actions dot character controls dot run dot started plus or equal to on run. Change this to context, copy this, paste, performed, canceled. Copy this, paste that, change this to bool, change this to is running pressed. In on run, set is running pressed equal to context dot read value as button, and this will make it return true if the button is pressed, and it'll return false if the button is not pressed. So now inside the Unity editor, if I'm pressing X, boom, is running pressed is toggled, and if I'm not pressing X, is running pressed is not toggled. Right trigger modifying, and then left stick modifying. Boom, there we go. And guess what? You're about to get a 2-for-1 special. The beauty with input actions is that if I want to make this input action compatible with keyboard, it's very simple to do. So for run, I could just add a binding, and let's say keyboard, it could be by location of key, and it could be, you could type in left shift. For attack, we could set it to, we could add another binding, set that to space. Actually, no, let's do left mouse. So mouse, and then left button. And for move, this one's a little more complex. We could do add up, down, left, right composite. So for up, we want it to be W. For down, we want it to be S. For left, obviously A. And for right, we can make it D. And for those on the spectrum, we could add another composite. So for up, we can make it be the up arrow key, down being the down arrow key, left being the left arrow key, and right being the right arrow key. So now we save this asset, and if I'm to run this, it should work. So I'm using ASDW to move, and it's changing the input. I'm also using the arrow keys to get input. I'm using both. I'm pressing left click on my mouse to get attack power between 0 and 1, and I'm pressing shift to get is running pressed. If you're not using the new Unity input system, what are you doing with life?